When the first enslaved people were brought from Africa, and they were brought in around the 1640s or so, and by the mid-17th century, most of the work that was done by artisans was being done by enslaved people. And while they're not the ones who would have designed the major buildings in Bridgetown, their input would be seen and felt in terms of the work that went into building these buildings. A lot of the buildings were built with what people refer to as soft stone, that's limestone, but some of the buildings were also built with rubble stone, and then they were covered with a plaster and with some slats of wood, and we refer to that as a lath and plaster construction. And many of the enslaved artisans were responsible for putting that material on buildings. So when we look at the building itself, well, we might well understand that these buildings are designed by white entrepreneurs, by white builders, etc. The labor that went into it was done by enslaved people. If you go into Bridgetown now, in what used to be called the Lower Green, or now in the area now known as Jubilee Gardens, not far from St. Mary's Church. There was what we call the slave shambles. That's where the enslaved people bought and sold. It was well known by the white planters and the merchants in Bridgetown as a place where they suspected that enslaved people were taking some of the produce of the plantation and fencing it in Bridgetown. Now, very often we see the huckstering taking place in Bridgetown, or the hawking. And I have to say a little something about that, because throughout the Caribbean you have these various terms. You have the term hawker, which is used in Barbados. It's an English term. But then you also have, in Jamaica, you're a higgler. And in another place, you're a huckster. But that culture appears very early in the history of enslavement in Bridgetown. So sugarcane, we see sugarcane being sold on the street corners of Barbados now. And sugarcane was sold on the streets of Bridgetown. Of course, enslaved people were not supposed to have sugarcane for sale, but they sold it. And the shambles, you will sell sugar cakes. So one of the features of Bridgetown life was that in some cases, enslaved people had won, I don't want to call it the right, but they won the privilege of existing on their own account. So the market activity that you see in Bridgetown, which continued during the period of enslavement and beyond, and continues to this day, that itinerant peddling that takes place on the streets, that is pretty much a contribution that the enslaved people brought to Bridgetown. So it's a social contribution rather than an architectural contribution.